So it's fascinating that there is a cultural shift moving away from the left at the moment. And the question is, well, what is it moving to? And weirdly, it seems to be moving towards the dissident right, which is not something I actually expected, because I would have thought this would have been off limits for almost every mainstream publication to talk about, at least in a reasonably fair way, except suddenly Curtis Yarvin got favourable coverage in Vanity Fair. Do you know who Curtis Yarvin is?
The Dark Enlightenment guy, right?
Yeah, Mencius Moldbug. Like, I was very surprised that they weren't just calling him a Nazi, and so we're going to go through it. But before we do, if you don't know what I'm talking about, and there's no particular reason that you should know what I'm talking about, because this is rather niche political theory, really, we have a premium podcast called The Origins of the Dark Enlightenment, in which we explain where it all comes from. And as you can see by the thumbnail, they basically believe that liberalism itself is the problem. And the thing about all of these sort of dissident movements, in the same way that the critical race theorists also felt that liberalism is the problem, but they are operating in two totally different directions. What is interesting, though, is that they have a good critique of liberalism, and they do have some good points that the liberals should listen to. So I will link, that will be linked in the description. Definitely go and watch that, because it's actually very, very useful to know. And this also brings us on to the Thesis of Conservatism that I wrote to say, well, okay, if liberalism is to be one thing, what is the alternative? And one alternative, I think, is actually a kind of authentic conservatism that isn't just doing what the left did 10 years ago, a sort of self-generative conservatism. But again, we'll leave those linked in the description. You can read them in your own time. So anyway, let's move on to Curtis Yarvin and the Thiel verse getting favourable coverage in Vanity Fair. This is mad. Like, what's going on?
I mean, is the reporter just very based, or?
No, I don't think James Pogue is very based.
I'm looking him up.
So anyway, inside the new right, where Peter Thiel is placing his biggest bets, they're not MAGA, they're not QAnon. Curtis Yarvin and the rising right are crafting a different strain of conservative politics. Shockingly positive framing here. Like this wouldn't have happened 3-4 years ago, right? So they go to the National Conservatism Conference. Now, I'd never even heard of this, to be honest, but it's certainly not led by the Republican GOP, because the Republicans are a bunch of liberals, as in literally classical liberals. This is a Whig ideology, and that's not what these people are. And of course, it begins with a woman called Amanda Milius taking a journalist to this, which I'm surprised anyone would bother doing that, frankly, in this day and age. But I guess it turned out all right. Don't screw us over. But anyway, he goes on, and I'm just going to read a few bits out because it's fascinating, right? He says, this was not Trump world, even if many of the people in the room saw Trump as a useful tool, and the parties aren't always this lame. NatCon, as this conference is known, has grown into a big tent gathering for a whole range of people who want to push the American right in a more economically populist, culturally conservative, and assertively nationalist direction. How does that sound to you, Callum?
I mean, that's kind of what we were trying to do in UKIP for the United Kingdom. So
yes, indeed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things that people didn't realize about UKIP is it wasn't like neoliberal conservatism 2.0 at all. It draws everyone from Israel hawks to fusty paleocon professors to mainstream figures like Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. But the most of the media attention that the conference tracks, it focuses on a cohort of rosy young blazer-wearing activists and writers, a crop of people representing the American right's radical young intellectuals, as the headline in the New Republic would soon put it, or conservatism's terrifying future, as David Brooks called them in The Atlantic, as in actual conservatives. And the left are, of course, like, oh, God, this is a problem. The podcasters, bro-ish anonymous Twitter posters, online philosophers, artists, and amorphous scenesters in this world are variously known as dissidents, neo-reactionaries, post-leftists, or the heterodox fringe. And they're all often grouped for convenience under the heading of America's New Right. They have a wildly diverse set of political backgrounds, ranging from 17th century Jacobite royalists to Marxist cultural critics to so-called reactionary feminists to the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski, whom they sometimes refer to with the semi-ironic affection of Uncle Ted. We'll have to do a book club on the Industrial Society at some point.
I need to read it, yeah.
It is. I'll bring in my copy. It's a fascinating read. Don't even know why he had to become a terrorist. People would have read it. People would have read it on its own merits. He was a professor.
I mean, I wonder if he's aware of like the miniature fan club he has. I mean, I presume yes.
Maybe. He's dying of cancer at the moment, though, isn't he?
Yeah, well, everyone sort of gets big as they die as well. In philosophy, don't they?
That's true. It's a broad tent, is what they're saying, which is good. It is good that there should be a broad tent, which is to say that the new right is not part of the conservative movement as most people in America would understand it. That's because the conservative movement in America isn't really conservative. It's ideological and it's liberal. It's Republican, which is specifically an outgrowth of English liberal philosophy. They in this worldview. One other thing as well, right? Is the point is, as they say, the project to overthrow the thrust of progress, at least such as liberals understand the world. As in, this is postmodern conservatism. And this is a sort of parochial morality of us and ours, rather than the universal morality of the GOP. And that's very scary to the left because, of course, they are the apex universalists. There's a reason that the GOP keep losing every fight to the left. It's because they're like, yeah, well, we should have universal morality. And the left are like, yeah, but you don't go nearly far enough for our tastes. And so the GOP keep losing because they're on the same rails, basically. And this is what the Dark Enlightenment folks are saying. So they say these worldviews run counter to the American narrative of the last century, that growth and technological innovation are inevitably leading us towards a better future. It's a position that has become quietly edgy and cool in new tech outposts like Miami and Austin, and in downtown Manhattan, where the new rightish politics are in, and signifiers like a demure cross necklace have become markers of a transgressive chic. No one is leading this movement, but it does have key figures. Good framing here, but isn't that interesting? Like, Elon Musk's like, yeah, I'm going to move Twitter to Miami. Well, what's cool in Miami? Parochial postmodern conservatism. Very interesting. But also, how are they wrong? Is technological progress leading us to an actual better future? You're not in favor of the Great Resets, are you?
Well, in some ways it's much better, obviously, but in other ways it's just giving more and more power to a smaller and smaller number of people and the ability to do that.
But it's also fundamentally changing the nature of what it is to be a person living in this society.
Yeah, to be human is very strange now compared to anyone in the past.
Yes. I mean, and literally within my lifetime.
I mean, speaking of that, actually, I was over in Exmouth. I went to the Exmouth Museum. Great museum. Go and give it a view if you're there. And went in. I was looking at the Victorian stuff. And I mentioned to my mother, so, it's kind of weird. You can look at the Victorian stuff and you almost think you're kind of like them because they're starting to look modern, unlike the medieval people. Yeah. And then I looked over at the World War II stuff and I went, it's actually kind of true of them as well. Like, I look at them and I think, none of you have phones. And you all still using these plasticky ones.
There was a video of, like, high schoolers in the 90s going around the other day, and they all look happy and healthy. Like, they all look normal. None of them are depressed. Like, they're all just prattling around, being normal. I'm like, man, that was peak liberal civilization right there. But it's gone and it's never coming back. So something else has to replace it. But anyway, things used to be better. It was better when we didn't have phones. I'm telling you, man. Better when we didn't have phones. Anyway, so one person backing this is Peter Thiel, the billionaire who helped fund NatCon and who was given the conference's opening address. In recent years, Thiel has grown increasingly involved in the politics of this younger and weirder world, becoming something like a nefarious godfather or genial rich uncle, depending on your perspective, which is excellent because any new serious cultural movement needs some elite backing. I'm actually working on a deep think about how elites are captured at the moment, because the critical race theorists have given us a really good framework for how this happens, and this is definitely one of the early steps of it. You need elite backing, dissident elites, to come and be like, yeah, no, I hate the way things are going, let's overturn it. You can see I've been reading their thinkers, right? This is Burnham. Anyway, Thiel has given more than $10 million to super PACs supporting the men's candidacies, and those are personally close to him, so various politicians. Vance is a former employee of Thiel's Mithril Capital. It's interesting, isn't it? Mithril Capital. He also owns one called Palatine. Do you know what Mithril is?
I just remember it from RuneScape.
Well, you should remember it from Lord of the Rings.
Oh yeah.
So the armor, and the Palatine, I think it's called, or the Palantir. Sorry, Palantir is the ball that I think is Merry takes from Gandalf and sees the Eye of Sauron in. And it's like, Peter Thiel is naming his companies after Lord of the Rings, like Obscura, weird, and it's like, oh, that's good to know. Very, dog whistles. That's what I say. Dog whistling the Lord of the Ring fandom. But anyway. So these are all the people that she mentions, Thiel, Vance, and Masters, are all friends with Curtis Yarvin, Probably need thunderbolts and lightning cracks at that point. A 48-year-old ex-programmer and blogger who has done more than anyone to articulate the world historical critique and popularize key terms of the new right. You'll often hear people in this world, again under many layers of irony, call him things like your Lord Yarvin or our prophet. Again, very fascinating and positive framing of Yarvin himself. He is one of the key figures who helped the dissident right find its feet in the early 2000s and like sort of 2000, 2010. And then he sort of started becoming like, I mean, I don't know if popular is the word because it's not something that has a mass audience yet. But there's definitely things about his critique that have really resonated with a bunch of online thinkers. And honestly, I'm one of them because he does have some good concepts, like the concept of the cathedral, to understand the left-wing belief system. Why do they all write the same article on the same day? It's like, well, it looks like a conspiracy, but it's not. It's actually that something has happened, a flare has gone up, and the beacons have been lit, and they're all like, oh, I've got to get my article out to show that I'm on the same team. And so, and then, you know, as soon as these articles come out, the people running the social media companies are, oh, I've got to deplatform Alex Jones because, you know, this is the organism that is the religion of leftism has to pull in certain directions in order to maintain its power. And I also reference specifically another one of Yarvin's concepts in my Politics of Warhammer 40,000 you can scroll down a bit because I can't remember what number it was. Scroll down to the list of things. It's part 8, How Cthulhu Swims Left. This was a really, really good way of conceptualizing why politics in the Overton window is just continually shifting towards the left in Western society. And, you know, no matter what happens, every political event is another leftward shift, another, which of course, you know, leaves the right completely on its arse and out of the discourse. And I think I can actually explain how that happens. And I think it begins with Marcuse's repressive tolerance. But that's free, in fact, so go and give that a read. I'm really proud of that as well. It's really good. But anyway, returning to the article. They say, people often struggle with what to make of Thiel's involvement in this ecosystem. Last year, journalist Max Chafkin published a biography of Thiel titled The Contrarian, in which he described Yarvin as the house political philosopher for a network often called the Thielverse. There's also a highly online set of Substack writers, podcasters, and anonymous Twitter posters, quote, our true electoral elite, as one podcaster describes them. This is academic agents, friends. Hey, lads. This group encompasses everyone from rich crypto bros and tech executives to the back-to-the-landers and disaffected members of the American intellectual class. But they share a basic worldview that individualist liberal ideology, increasingly bureaucratic governments, and big tech are all combining into a world that is at once tyrannical, chaotic, and devoid of the systems of value and morality that give human life richness and meaning, as Blake Masters recently put it, a dystopian hell world. Obviously true. I mean, like I said, they have a good critique of what is happening here. I mean, that's just indisputable. This is all happening. Vance believes that the well-educated and culturally liberal American elite has greatly benefited from globalization, the financialization of our economy, and the growing power of big tech. This has led to an Ivy League intellectual and management class, a quasi-aristocracy he calls the regime, to adopt a set of economic and cultural interests that directly oppose those of people in places like Middleton, Ohio, where he grew up. Demonstrably true.
Yeah, everything about this is just an explanation of how things are, and
Yes.
well, we can literally point to the evidence.
Yes.
So,
why would this even be something controversial? In the Vancian view, this class has no stake in what people on the new right often call the real economy, the farm and factory jobs that once sustained middle-class life in Middle America, which is why they're so happy to farm them out to foreign countries. This is a fundamental difference between new right figures like Vance and the Reaganite right-wingers of their parents' generation. To Vance, and he said this, culture war is class warfare. Very interesting. And this was what, I'm going to do an analysis of this at some point as well. This is what John Carpenter was critiquing in They Live, with the yuppies who have taken over. And just everything's about greed and money now. And this is harming the actual society of the economic prospects of the people who were relying on those small town jobs in order to get ahead. And of course, the sort of Reaganite neoliberals don't care about that at all. That's not how they see things. As long as numbers go up, world must be better. It's like, well, not entirely. I mean, Vance here says, I've got to be honest with you, I really don't care what happens in Ukraine. Well, who does? Why would I? What have I got to do with Ukraine? a flick at the fact that he thinks the American-led global order is about as much enriching defense contractors and Hunter Biden and think tank types as it is about defending America's interests, which is absolutely true. I do care about the fact that my community right now is in my community right now, the leading cause of death among 18 to 45-year-olds is Mexican fentanyl. How dare he have a parochial local morality that cares about the real people that he knows in his life?
Does he not care about global geopolitics?
Yes. You know that Russia's invading Ukraine, don't you? It's like, dude, I have to walk past drug addicts on my way to work who are dying from fentanyl overdoses. Can we build a wall? Anyway. His criticisms of big tech as enemies of Western civilization often get lost in the run of Republican outrage over Trump being kicked off Twitter and Facebook, but they go much deeper than this. Vance believes that the regime has sold an elusive story that consumer gadgets and social media are constantly making our lives better, even as wages stagnate and technology feeds into an epidemic of depression. Obviously true. Do not let your children use smartphones. End of story. This is just such an obviously true statement. It's like, well, he believes this. It's like, yeah, but that's because it's real. Part of why people have trouble describing this new right is because there's a bunch of people who believe the system that organizes our society and government, which most of us think of as normal, is actually bizarre and insane. Anyone over 40 can say that this system is bizarre and insane. Like, this is the reason libs of TikTok is famous. Because all they do is show the bizarre insanity of this system. Like, sorry, if you... And I love the way... Well, they think that we're crazy. So that's because you are crazy.
But you will have jobs as well. Like, you somehow managed to thrive in this society.
Well, that's because they're supporters and members of it. They're sycophants of it.
Yeah, sure, but like this, no other situation would they be able to do anything. Like, nowhere in Afghanistan will these people be able to function.
Yes, only in the modern... They are. I think it would be Marcuse who would say that they're a product of the liberal capitalist system. Like, you're right, they couldn't exist anywhere else, but they wouldn't be produced anywhere else. These sort of people are only produced in this kind of society. And as I say, they think of it as bizarre and insane, which, of course, the leftist city dweller thinks is completely normal, which naturally makes them look bizarre and insane to the people who think this system is normal. You'll hear these people talk about our globalized consumerist society as clown world. Oh no. Getting kids to chop off their dicks and having Disney persuade them they're gay is peak normality. What are you talking about? It's totally normal, bro. So, well, of course you're insane. Look at you. Just look at you and compare yourself to any other civilization, any other place in the world, and any other portion of time, and be like, right, so did they do this then? No, they didn't. Oh, then we're not the normal ones. Anyway, I'm going to end it there because this is actually a really, really long article, and we could talk about this all day. But there's one thing to end on, right? He at the very end of the article, he says, I asked Vance to tell me, on the record, what he'd like American liberals who thought that he was proposing a fascist takeover of America to understand. It's like, what's fascist about this? I'd like there to be less fentanyl in my community, please. I'd like you to stop grooming children to be gay and chop off their bits, please.
Well, this is basically fascism. I'm leaving.
What a Nazi you are. He spoke earnestly. I think the cultural world you operate in is incredibly biased against the leaders of his movement, like me in particular. He encouraged me to resist this tendency, which he thought was the product of a media machine leading us towards a soulless dystopia that none of us want to live in. That impulse, he said, is fundamentally in the service of something far worse than anything in your wildest nightmares than what you see here. They aren't fascists in any way, shape or form. They're not Enlightenment thinkers in any way, shape or form. I don't even think you can reasonably call them nationalists, because nationalism is an Enlightenment project. They are something that is pre-theoretical in this way. They start way before the Enlightenment. They're drawing upon truly ancient ideas of what it is to be a human, as I understand them. But I thought that was fascinating, and I think it's really interesting how the dissident right is finally going mainstream.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as this essay that Carl wrote on the politics of Warhammer 40,000 with an audio track to go and listen as well. But also, if you'd like to find out what else we're putting out, you can follow us on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.